Most people don't know this, but the disappearance of Madeleine McCann wasn't the first time a little girl was tragically lost in her mother Kate's lineage. Decades earlier, her grandmother, Eileen, lived through the same nightmare of burying a child, a grief that marked the family forever. This shocking information connects us to a deep and silent fear. The fear that the tragedies in our families are not coincidences, but echoes. The fear that the unresolved pain of our grandparents could somehow repeat itself in our lives, like an invisible script we are doomed to follow. What the world called a crime or an accident might be something much deeper. A family curse. Not a curse of spells and witchcraft, but a psychological pattern of loss that has traveled silently through generations. Today, we are going to unearth the secret of the McCann grandmother. And I promise to show you how this story from the past is the key that rewrites everything we know about Madeleine's disappearance. To understand the curse, we first need to know the woman who unknowingly originated it, Eileen McCann, Kate's mother. A woman described as strong, the pillar of a Catholic Irish family. But behind that strength there was a wound that never healed. Eileen and her husband Brian had other children before Kate, and one of their daughters, Pamela, died tragically. The pain of losing a child, a pain that science still cannot measure, settled in Eileen's heart and consequently in the heart of the family. This is our inciting incident, not an event, but a state, an unresolved grief. In families that lack the emotional tools to process such a massive loss, the pain doesn't just go away, it transforms. It becomes a heavy silence at the dinner table. It becomes a nameless anxiety. It becomes a paralyzing fear that the tragedy could happen again. The main conflict of this story is not against a kidnapper. It's against a ghost. The ghost of a past loss that haunts the present. Kate McCann grew up in this environment, in the shadow of a sister she never knew, and a grief that wasn't hers, but which she inherited. Modern psychology has a name for this: transgenerational trauma. It's the idea that severe trauma can be passed down from one generation to the next, not genetically, but through behavioral patterns, unexplained fears, and a sadness that seems to have no origin. Kate, the doctor, the woman of control, may have carried within her, without knowing, her mother's deepest fear, the fear of losing a daughter. And that unconscious fear became the hidden script of her life, waiting for the right moment to manifest. The crime scene, therefore, is not apartment 5A. It's the family tree. With inherited trauma as the backdrop, every decision the McCanns made on their holiday in Portugal takes on a new, frightening layer of meaning. The tension escalates when we realize they weren't just on a leisure trip. They were, perhaps, staging a play to fight the ghost of the past. The first obstacle to peace was the obsessive need for control. The choice of the resort, the rigid dinner routine, the insistence on maintaining a facade of a perfect holiday. To the world, it looked like the behavior of a successful, upper-middle-class family. But through the lens of transgenerational trauma, all this control can be seen as a desperate attempt to keep chaos at bay. If everything is perfectly planned, if all the rules are followed, then tragedy cannot strike again. It's a bargain with fate. The problem is that the very routine they created, one of collective negligence, was the embodiment of chaos disguised as order. The second obstacle was an invisible family loyalty. The psychologist Anne Ancelin Schutzenberger studied how, out of a blind and unconscious love, descendants try to heal their ancestors, often by repeating their fates. Kate, by becoming a mother to a little girl, Madeleine, may have unconsciously taken on the task of fixing her own mother's pain. How? By being the perfect mother, having the perfect family, proving that this time the daughter would be safe. But this pressure to be perfect, to rewrite the family history, may have created an anxiety so immense that it led her to make decisions that, from the outside, seem inexplicable. And here, the story gives us a clue, a dark omen. The negligence of leaving the children alone was not a one-time act. It happened night after night. It's a pattern, and as the psychologist Carl Jung warned us, what you resist persists. They resisted admitting the risk, and so the danger persisted. It's as if the curse, the trauma pattern, was testing the limits, pushing the family ever closer to the abyss, waiting for the opportunity to repeat itself. With every night that nothing happened, the illusion of control grew stronger, and the echo of the old tragedy grew a little louder, though no one was listening. The point of no return happens on the night of May 3rd. It's the moment the echo becomes a scream. Madeleine's disappearance is no longer a threat, an anxiety, a ghost. It is the literal, concrete, and brutal repetition of the family's original trauma. The curse has been fulfilled. The grandmother's pain is now the mother's pain. The fate that Kate may have spent her entire life unconsciously trying to avoid has found her. From this moment on, the story changes forever. The trauma is no longer a family secret whispered through time. It explodes and becomes the biggest media spectacle of the century. And Kate and Jerry's reaction to this explosion is what defines the rest of their lives. Instead of turning inward, of asking themselves, how could this happen again in our family? They are forced to turn outward. The search for Madeleine becomes the only possible narrative. This relentless search, which to the world is an act of love and hope, can be seen through the lens of trauma as something else. An escape. An escape from the unbearable pain of looking in the mirror and seeing the reflection of her mother, of her grandmother. An escape from the terrifying question, did I somehow cause this? Was I destined for this? By focusing on an external kidnapper, they avoid having to face the internal ghost. The search for Madeleine becomes the mission that prevents them from undertaking the real search. The search for the roots of pain in their own lineage. They can no longer go back to being the family they were. Now, they are the public embodiment of their own family curse, condemned to perform their grief on a global stage, perhaps without ever understanding the script they were following. The question that lingers, the hook that drags us into the depths of this mystery, is, if trauma can be inherited, can the way of coping with it be inherited too? What does the grandmother's unresolved grief teach us about Kate and Jerry's controversial reactions? The turning point of this story isn't found in a piece of evidence, but in a pattern. The pattern of reacting to trauma. To understand Kate and Jerry's behavior, which so many judged as cold or strange, we need to look not at them but at the previous generation. How did the grandmother Eileen cope with the loss of her daughter? The Irish Catholic culture of that era, and British culture in general, preached resilience through silence. Pain was something to be endured with dignity, not to be displayed. Grief was a private matter, almost a taboo. Eileen learned to be strong, to not fall apart, to carry her pain inside. And this survival mechanism, this way of dealing with grief, became part of the family's emotional software. Kate didn't just learn to walk and talk from her mother, she unconsciously learned how to grieve. Kate McCann's behavior after Madeleine's disappearance is a mirror of her mother's behavior, the same apparent strength, the same refusal to surrender to public despair, the same controlled dignity. What the world interpreted as coldness and a lack of emotion may have been, in fact, the deepest and most tragic form of loyalty. Kate was, unknowingly, playing the role she learned from her mother. She was grieving in the only way her family knew how, in silence on the inside. The curse is not just the repetition of the tragedy, it is the repetition of the reaction to the tragedy, the same pattern of silent grief, of internalized pain. And this is an irreversible change, because, by repeating her mother's pattern, Kate ensured that the trauma once again would not be fully processed, not be healed. She encapsulated it, turned it into a search, a campaign, a foundation. But the primal scream of loss, the breakdown the world expected to see, was perhaps never allowed to surface. The ghost of the grandmother's unresolved grief didn't just claim another daughter from the family. It ensured that the new pain would be handled exactly like the old one, with a dignified silence and a wound that never closes. You know, there's a concept in trauma psychology that haunts me. The idea that what is not resolved will be repeated. A family trauma is like a scream let out in a cave. The first generation hears the full scream. The second, like Kate's, hears only the echo. And the third, like Madeleine, who heard nothing, feels only the strange vibration in the walls, a nameless anxiety, a danger she doesn't know the source of. The curse is living with the vibration of a scream you never heard. This gives us a new lens through which to view the negligence. The decision to leave the children alone, which seems so inexplicable for such intelligent and controlling parents, can be understood differently. The unresolved trauma of loss inherited from the grandmother may have created a blind spot in Kate. A fear so profound that something could happen to her children that she had to deny any possibility of risk. It's a psychological paradox. The extreme fear of loss led her to a behavior that made the loss possible. It's like being so afraid of heights that you refuse to look down while walking on the edge of a cliff. Modern science is beginning to give us clues as to how this is possible. The field of epigenetics suggests that extreme trauma can leave chemical marks on our DNA, like switches that are turned on or off. These marks don't change our genes, but they can alter how our genes are expressed, and they can be passed down to subsequent generations. This means that the granddaughter of a woman who lived through a famine might be born with a metabolism more prone to storing fat, and the granddaughter of a woman who lived through a traumatic loss might be born with a nervous system that is more reactive to stress, more prone to anxiety. The curse might not just be a story we tell. It might be something we carry in our very cells. With this, the story becomes even more tragic. It's no longer about judging an act of negligence. It's about witnessing the journey of a woman who may have been a prisoner of her own biology and family history, fighting against a fate that was already written in her unconscious. The question that remains then is almost unbearable. If we are fated to repeat these patterns, is there any way to break the chain? The resolution of this mystery, therefore, is not in finding a culprit, but in recognizing a pattern. The central conflict was never between Kate McCann and a kidnapper, but between Kate McCann and the ghost of her own family history. The answer to the question, why did this happen, lies not in the events of that night, but in the echo of pain that traveled through generations. Kate McCann's character arc is that of a Greek tragic hero, a woman who, in desperately trying to flee her destiny, the inherited fear of losing a daughter, ran straight into it. Remember the reality anchor we started with, Jung's phrase that what is not made conscious becomes fate. The grandmother's unprocessed grief, the mother's silent pain, all of it became the unconscious script that directed Kate's life. The negligence, the need for control, the cold reaction to trauma, none of it has to be seen as malice. It can be seen as a symptom. Symptoms of an ancestral wound that finally found a way to manifest. The resolution, then, is that the curse was not an external force but an internal programming, and Madeleine's disappearance was not the beginning of the tragedy. It was the tragic end of a story that began decades before. Peace, for this family, can only be found on the day they stop looking forward, searching for a kidnapper, and have the courage to look back into the mirror and heal the original wound. In the end, what does the story of the McCann curse teach us? The great lesson, the big idea that emerges from this journey into the past, is that we are so much more than our individual choices. We are walking libraries, carrying the stories, the secrets, and the unresolved pains of those who came before us. We believe our fears and anxieties are uniquely our own, but often we are just the echo of a scream that was let out in another generation. And this makes me think, in a profound and slightly frightening way, about our own lives. What are the silent curses in our families? The pattern of addiction that repeats itself, the financial hardship that seems to stalk the bloodline, the anxiety that passes from mother to daughter like an unwanted inheritance. The McCann case gives us a powerful tool, the courage to become archaeologists of our own history, the courage to ask our parents and grandparents about their pain, their secrets, their losses, because the only way to break a curse that isn't magical but psychological is by bringing it into the light of consciousness. You have to name the ghost for it to stop haunting you. And perhaps the greatest tribute we can pay to Madeleine is to use her story as a map, not to find her but to find ourselves. My final opinion after diving into this ancestral story is that blaming Kate McCann for her mistakes is like blaming a branch for growing crooked without ever looking at the tree it came from. What we Have seen here is not the story of a bad mother, but perhaps one of the most tragic victims of an invisible family loyalty. She may have been the carrier of a pain that was not hers, the executor of a script she did not write. And the real curse is not the repetition of tragedy. It is the inability to recognize the pattern. It is to keep searching for a monster out there, when the real ghost has always been inside the family's own story, waiting to be named, to be seen, to be healed. And now, after unearthing this secret, I really want to know what this story has awakened in you. Can you think of a pattern, a fear, or a sadness in your family that seems to have no clear origin? Write it here in the comments. You don't have to give details. It can just be a reflection on how the past reverberates in the present. I will read everyone, because it is by sharing these insights that we begin to break these invisible chains. Remember, what the son wishes to forget, the grandson wishes to remember. For those who felt the chill of this revelation and want to continue deciphering the hidden codes that govern us, our next meeting is already set. We are going to investigate the story of the Hemingway family, and the question we will answer is, why did suicide repeat itself for 4 generations? Is it genetics, or is it a trauma that became a family tradition? If you believe that understanding the past is the only way to free the future, subscribe to the channel. Be a part of this archaeology of the soul. And for those who feel that this work is more than just storytelling, that it is a form of healing, the super chat is our signal. It's the way of saying, keep bringing what's in the basement to light. Every contribution is what allows us to deepen this research and share these tools of understanding with more people. It's the gesture that transforms this channel into a community of seekers. In the end, my role is not to be a judge. It is only to hold the lantern so that you can look into the darkness. What you find there belongs only to you.